talk about the Emancipation Proclamation, I think you've probably heard of it, but the purpose behind it might be a mystery to you. Now, let's talk about, let's back up. In the summer of 1862, this is before the Battle of Antietam. Again, in the summer of 1862, prior to the Battle of Antietam, President Lincoln got all of his cabinet members together for a meeting. Again, in the summer of 1862, prior to this Battle of Antietam that we have studied, President Lincoln got his cabinet together, and he told the cabinet that he was considering issuing a proclamation that would free the slaves in the states that had seceded from the Union. That's key. So in the summer of 1862, prior to the Battle of Antietam, President Lincoln had assembled his cabinet together, and he told his cabinet members that he was considering issuing a proclamation. And this proclamation would free slaves in the states that had seceded from the Union. So this didn't mention what would happen to slaves in what 5 states? No. Border states. So all the states that seceded from the Union, their slaves would be free if he signs this proclamation. But he didn't mention the proclamation anything about the slaves in the border states. And some of the border states had slavery. Well, when he told his cabinet about this, they told him, President Lincoln, you better wait until when to issue this proclamation? After what? Well, no, not after the war. They'd been getting their butts kicked left and right. You don't want to issue something like this after you lose, because it looks like you're desperate. So they're telling them, well, after a victory, because they don't know if they're going to get this victory at Antietam. So they say to him, this is not a bad idea, but don't issue any kind of a proclamation until after a Union victory. Otherwise, we look weak and desperate. So the President's proclamation would wait to be announced until after a Union victory in the Civil War, because they haven't had any. And President Lincoln, although historians say it really only because Lee retreated did he lose, it was probably more of a military tie in a lot of ways. But it was enough of a victory for Lincoln that he decided he would announce the Emancipation Proclamation, which he did on January 1st of 1863. So again, in the summer of 1862, prior to the Battle of Antietam, President Lincoln had assembled his cabinet and informed that he was considering issuing a proclamation that would free slaves in all the states that seceded from the Union. Did not mention what would happen to slaves in the 5 neutral border states. Well, after this discussion with his cabinet, they decided that the President would wait to announce this proclamation until after a Union victory in the Civil War. And Lincoln considered this Battle of Antietam enough of a Union victory to announce his plans. So on January 1st of 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. Yep.
So how does that work? The slaves just have to run to the Union's line to be free, or what?
Well, we'll talk about that. That's a good question. Okay? Now, this presidential proclamation officially ended slavery in the Confederate States. But Colt is right. In order to get free, where did they have to get to? Union land, Union lines, Union territory. And were they held on these plantations and stuff very hard? Not really, because what's going on? They're defending their homeland. Now, this is really key to understand this. There were 2 major reasons Lincoln issued this Emancipation Proclamation. Not just to free the slaves. There are 2 reasons why he freed the slaves. Anybody want to guess one, maybe? Not so much. What? Well, that's pretty close. And we'll get to this later, but Congress was full of radical Republicans at the time. And radical Republicans were Northerners who thought that Lincoln was way too soft on the Confederacy. They thought he ought to punish the Confederacy more. And by signing the Emancipation Proclamation and taking away the South's slaves, the radical Republicans got off Lincoln's case for being too soft, because they were, they were hampering their economy and everything else. So you're partially right. So the Emancipation Proclamation quieted down these radical Republicans who were always on Lincoln's case because he was too soft on the Confederacy. And by taking away their slaves, these radical Republicans thought Lincoln was taking a harder stand. Does that make sense? But what was Lincoln afraid? How was the South going to win the war? What were they going to need? We talked about it way back. We talked about Southern advantages and Southern strategy, etc. Who did the South want help from? Great Britain and France. The second reason, when he passed the Emancipation Proclamation, it guaranteed that Great Britain and France would stay out of the war. Guaranteed it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How can he make rules for a country that wasn't his yet?
Well,
Because he didn't know they were going to win. So
no,
they wouldn't have to
but
follow
that's a
the
good
rules.
question. The Union's still the Union until otherwise.
Yeah, but the Confederacy was not. So how
Yeah,
can
no,
he-
they are until they win. They're just subversive. It's a great point. Great point, Brady. He can make rules on them because they're still part of the Union until they win.
That doesn't mean they have to follow
Yeah.
them.
No, well, they're not going to voluntarily give these slaves up.
Oh, yeah,
You know what I'm
but
saying?
I just don't know why he would.
Well, the reason he did it, again, wasn't to be helpful to the slaves in a
Yeah.
way. He did it to quiet the radical Republicans, but mainly he did it to keep France and Great Britain out of the war. Now, if Great Britain and France enter the war now that the slaves are free, what are they really fighting for?
Slavery.
Slavery. They were more than willing to provide aid if the issue was states' rights. The rights of the southern states to govern themselves as they wished. But their viewpoint is if you continue to fight because they released your slaves, because you want your slaves back, you're fighting not for states' rights anymore, but you're fighting for slavery. And those foreign countries were not going to get in a war that showed that they supported slavery. This was really brilliant on Lincoln's part. The Emancipation Proclamation, the most important part of that was that it would keep France and Great Britain out of the war. Both France and Great Britain were willing to help the South concerning states' rights, the rights to govern yourself as you wish. But if they continue to fight for slavery, if the Confederates continue to fight for slavery, France or Great Britain aren't going to fight in that fight. It was a brilliant strategy on the part of Lincoln. Now, some questions might be, well, did any of these blacks fight on the side of the Union after they were freed? It was estimated about 180,000 did. About 180,000 blacks fought on the Union side in the Civil War after the Emancipation Proclamation. About 180,000. Yep, after the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, it was estimated that about 180,000 blacks fought on the Union side. Now, they were segregated. Here's where you start your segregation. And they were called the United States Colored Troops. They were all put together. They didn't fight side by side with white soldiers. Okay? They were segregated into what was called the United States Colored Troops. They were often referred to as Buffalo Soldiers. Buffalo Soldiers. Now, we didn't have enough confidence, the Union being didn't have enough confidence to let those United States Colored Troops command themselves. So the only white people fighting in the United States Colored Troops were what? Officers. Officers. So these Negro soldiers about 180,000 during the course of the Civil War were segregated into what they called the United States Colored Troops. They were often called Buffalo Soldiers and were all commanded by white officers. Now, what's the rule if you capture somebody in battle, Cody? You make them a prisoner of war, right? Not necessarily will they get good treatment, but you don't execute it, right? That's the rules of war. What do you think the Confederate philosophy was if they captured a black soldier? Yeah, they didn't treat them as prisoners of war. They usually shot them, or to make a point, burned them to death. That's generally what happened to a black soldier that was caught by the Confederates after the Emancipation Proclamation. They usually shot him on sight, or if they wanted to make him suffer a little bit, they burnt them to death. I can't imagine what kind of death that would be, to be burned to death. It'd be rough. Now, what would happen, answer this question for me, Cesar. What would happen if a white commander of black troops was captured by the Confederates?
Would you kill a prisoner of war?
He would only hope so. They treated them about like they did the black soldiers. If you were a white soldier commanding black troops and you were caught by the Confederates, they usually shot you or burnt you. Same treatment. Same treatment. Isn't that interesting? All right. That, my friends, will end the lecture for today, and we will pick up tomorrow with the battles of Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, leading into the most famous Civil War battle, Gettysburg. Okay? Now listen, tomorrow's Wednesday. I am going to give you a worksheet on Thursday at the start of the period. I haven't decided yet, but I may or may not let you use the period to finish that before we get into the Battle of Gettysburg. So next time I give you time in class, it would be very good to use time in class. Get that thing done.
Did he cash them?
No, the whole thing had to be filled.
Oh, you get
Hey, hang on
5
just a second.